For those of you I haven't met yet, I'm Sally McNamara. I'm the Asia Pacific Director of HSM Advisory. I'm based in Melbourne. I think I've lost count of the number of lockdown days we've had, but I'm very glad to be able to connect with you all in this way at least. So HSM, as you know, is a research and advisory company focusing on the future of work, founded by Professor Lynda Gratton more than 13 years ago, actually now. And as you can imagine, we've been busier than ever in the last 18 months. This is the time for us to all be future-proofing our capabilities. So we're really excited today to be bringing you a perspective from Asia Pacific. We've been doing a lot of work in Asia Pacific, and Lynda's going to be joined in conversation with Jolene Chen, who's the global CHRO of Prudential based in Singapore. So we're really looking forward to hearing Lynda and Jolene's thoughts and insights. So as you know, we've had a huge pandemic webinar series. I can't imagine we had anticipated just how many topics we'd be covering or how long we'd be going in this pandemic. We're happy to share the full program with you. So just let us know in the chat if you'd like any of those links. And also, as you know, we're very interactive in these sessions. So please pop any questions into the chat that come up. Do share your thoughts with the group and the community that we've got here. And I think just quickly taking a look at these range of topics, it really brings home for me the huge opportunities we have in redesigning work and also the huge complexities. So that really takes us to today, where we're going to be looking at how is it that we're going to create the conditions for these new ways of working. And I know Lynda's just really excitingly finished her new book on the topic of redesigning work. So I'm sure she'll share more about that with us all as well. So there's a huge opportunity here in that redesign, but we do need to create those right conditions, or we do run the risk of sliding back to where we were pre-pandemic. And let's just remember that whilst, of course, we miss a lot of things about pre-pandemic life, on the whole, it wasn't actually the best place for us to be in. So long before the pandemic, we know we had challenges around just how sustainable our ways of working were. So we really need to take our opportunity now. So in today's session, I'm going to cover a few key points to consider when you're thinking about how it is you're going to create these conditions for success. And then I'll hand over to Lynda to lead a conversation with Jolene from Prudential. There's some really fascinating case studies and insights to share about the work Prudential's been doing in this area. So let's start with a question. You know that we love to get your insights and we love to hear what's top of mind for everyone. So in a few words, and let's just put this in the chat today, what's the biggest blocker you're finding to embedding new ways of working right now? So let's see what's top of mind for you all on this topic. Just pop it in the chat function. Mindset. Old school mindset, right? Yeah, attached to old ways of working, old thinking. And when we talk about these new ways of working, I saw a question around what do we mean? So for instance, hybrid working could be an example of that. Overwhelm, wow. Yeah.
Wow, lots of something, yeah.
Yeah.
Fatigue, yeah.
Fatigue, yeah, that's a big one, isn't it, Lynda?
Yeah. Trust, yeah.
Culture, uncertainty. Yeah, defining what those new ways of working are, I can see from that. Yeah, so that consistency of what do we actually mean by this and what are we going to do with it? Risk, right. Well, thank you so much. Some really interesting and varied pieces there, but just from a glance, we can absolutely see how many things that we're grappling with here.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. And do continue to add your thoughts. Thoughts and questions. Actually, we'll invite you at the end, post Lynda and Jolene's conversation. If you have questions, we'll invite everyone to turn their videos on as well, so we can all see each other and connect in that way at the end. Too much change to deal with, yes. That brings us to our first few key points that I'll run through now. Okay, so where we're at now, let's just reflect on that, because really we're in a state of ongoing uncertainty. And I think it's gone on for a lot longer than any of us may have anticipated, depending on where you're located, of course, but a lot of us still have quite limited freedoms. And certainly we haven't yet seen the mass return to the office, for instance. And perhaps we're expecting the vaccine was going to deliver us a lot more immediate freedoms. So the first thing that we want to remember in times like this of great uncertainty is that whilst it can feel like everything is changing and the ground beneath us is just shifting, there are some things that can anchor us back to a stability point. So we need to help people understand what are those anchors that are going to help them feel like not everything is changing, even though it can feel that way. And the point here is really that a lot of the overwhelm that we're seeing and hearing about right now is really linked to that sense that nothing is stable or certain. So through being purpose and value led when creating these new ways of working, so if we think about hybrid and how you're going to bring that into your business and embed that combination of home and virtual working, or remote and virtual working and office, really we're creating narratives that help people make sense of what's changing and what isn't. And we also know it's a great way to re-energize people through connecting back to that why, that purpose of our work, which actually we know is really key when people are feeling fatigued, as they currently, many of them are. And also in terms of people have really reflected through this pandemic about what's most important to them, and the meaning in what you do in your work has really come through in that. So many of you remember that narratives need to be a couple of things. They need to be transparent. So they absolutely need to acknowledge the realities of what everyone's experiencing, but also help people understand the opportunities as well. So with a positive outlook. They need to be co-creational. So we need to involve people in an ongoing and two-way dialogue around what's changing and what's remaining. They need to be enduring. And this is where that sense of purpose, that story, the meaning about the future, and also the lessons learned. I mean, we've uncovered incredible abilities to be adaptable during this time, and that should be celebrated. And then finally, composed. So providing that sense of calm, stability that can help people anchor in the face of uncertainty. And I know we're going to hear more from Jolene about how Prudential took this one step further and actually co-created a set of mindsets and behaviors linked to each value with all of their employees. So the second thing is we need to remember to empower people to be part of the change. So this has been a huge shift where pre-pandemic we would have said that for sure employees were increasingly expecting to be consulted and to be part of the change. What we'd say now is that it's no longer something that's a nice to have or that they're asking, but it's a clear expectation, and it's something that you see it doesn't go well if it's not happening. It's not well received if they're not involved in this way. And a couple of points that we'd make here to remember on this is that it's moving from communication, which is typically a one-way stream from senior leaders to employees, into that dialogue. So because these new ways of working are going to absolutely need to be iterative, we're all experimenting here, that requires an ongoing dialogue. And the other interesting point here is that although we might sometimes feel, particularly if there's a pandemic surge, for instance, as there is currently in several places, that there's too much uncertainty or fatigue to bring large groups together. Actually, we're seeing the opposite. We're seeing that people want to share and connect more than ever, and that the power of that peer-to-peer support has actually been enormous, and maybe bigger than we'd expected. In many cases, even more important than manager support. People are finding that. The second point here is diversity of thought. So we really need to consider a wide range of views. We need a whole set of different people. And we need to consider that different people and different personalities respond in different ways. So keeping open different channels that everyone can provide input in a format they're most comfortable with. And an example of that might be in video meetings. So we know some people find it easier to contribute in a virtual way than they might face to face. Other people struggle with it. So it's about thinking about what are those channels and preferences. The third point here, harnessing the power of your influences. So we know that influencers are very well often people that don't sit in your formal hierarchy, but they have huge informal power. And they have the power to role model these new ways of working for all of your employees. Unlocking the power of these people is really crucial to embed these new ways of working. But of course, first you have to be able to identify who those people are. And the final point we'll just make before we get into conversation with Lynda and Jolene is the upskilling. And I know Lynda certainly talked about this a lot with her role on the WEF Council of Jobs. We ran another webinar entirely dedicated to skills. So if you're interested in that, we can share that recording with you. We need to think about how do we actually upskill people to be able to adapt through all this change. Because even where there are great positives and opportunity of change, there are always downsides and challenges as well. And if I just take one as an example, so of course people love, on the whole, the flexibility of where and when we can work. That's very clear, people don't want to lose that. However, one big thing that we're seeing is an inability to properly switch off and replenish. So really, it brings up this point of human capabilities, these qualities that are going to allow us to step into this change, things like adaptability, resilience, empathy, which we've seen have grown hugely during this time. And if we think about that boundaries point, that ability to switch off, that requires a really strong sense of self-awareness and self-management. And we're really seeing that people need help with that. Of course, some of that, the organization needs to enable, but responsibility also lies with the individual on that. And if we can upskill people in these foundational human capabilities, we'll be able to bake in that greater resilience that'll take us through this time of change. And actually from that foundation as well, it becomes easier to learn the technical skills, like digital skills, which are always changing. So with those key points in mind, I'm really delighted to now hand over to Professor Lynda Gratton, who's our HSM founder, obviously a global thought leader. I think you've written now 11, Lynda, with the new one, 11 books, I believe. And Jolene Chen, who's the CHRO of Prudential, who are going to continue the conversation today.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Sally. And a big welcome to Jolene to join us today on this really interesting conversation about the future. I mean, Jolene, you and I have known each other for many years, probably more than we'd like to remember. But I think both of us would say that the time that we've been through is just absolutely extraordinary. So I wanted to, start by asking you, Jolene, lots of things are changing in the world. How do you see it from your perspective? What's happening in the Prudential? By the way, do keep the chat going. I'm not always going to refer to the chat, those of you who are chatting, but certainly I've got it open. I'm keeping an eye on it. So I'll bring your chat in as it comes. Yeah.
Hi everyone. I just want to say thank you for the invitation to participate in this workshop, Lynda and Sally. I think we have known each other really for many years, and I think
Yes.
I have read most of your books. I'm waiting for the next book to be out, Lynda.
There's one book, actually, The Democratic Enterprise, that only my mother read, Jolene.
Okay, maybe that's not the one then.
If you've read The Democratic Enterprise, that is
I did not.
pretty.
Yes, most of your books.
If anyone's read The Democratic Enterprise, actually put your name in the chat. I don't know anyone who has. Anyway, Jolene, yes, we've known each other forever.
Yes, I know. So I just want to say a few things about Prudential. We are actually, not many of you know, we are actually a 173-year-old company. Right. And what is very exciting, we have just completed our demerger as of yesterday. And so right now we're an exclusive focusing on serving customers, millions of customers actually in Asia and in Africa. So we have been preparing for this pivot in the last 1 or 2 years itself. And we have been working on a major transformation. All this change is not possible, if not what Sally has said earlier on about anchoring on the purpose. And our purpose is to help people get the most out of life, as you can see in my background. What do we do, actually? We do this by making healthcare accessible and affordable by protecting assets and growing wealth and empowering people to save for their goals, as in their wealth. So all this combines is to make customers healthier and wealthier. So that's who we are in Prudential. And this has changed a lot in the last 1.5 years with COVID. But I think that it has brought out the best in us in a certain ways to help us to adapt very quickly to remote working itself. And the business has also adapted very quickly in terms of virtual sales that we never had done before. We have looked at virtual training, and we are now hiring, onboarding folks into the company and to the businesses very seamlessly through this process. So I think that we are positioned to make these shifts since we have made and work on a lot of the key foundations that we have. So the work around transformation, digitization will continue. And this is on top of all the things we do. But more importantly is how we take care of our people, making sure that we're equipped with the right skills and capabilities to face to the future challenges.
Thank you, Jolene. As Sally showed earlier, we've been running the pandemic series from the beginning. And honestly, I don't think any of us realized we would have so many webinars. Some of you know, I kept a diary. So I'll tell you where I am now, because I've got it in front of me, obviously. Volume 12. I didn't think it would be volume 12. And I've, as Sally said, I've just finished a book called Redesigning Work. It will be out on the 3rd of March. You can pre-order your copy whenever you want. Redesigning Work. But I talked at the very beginning about what we've learned. And I think, Jolene, it so resonates with what you've learned at the Pru. And the two things that really came out when I looked at all my data about the pandemic was digitalization. We just became more digital, didn't we? Your customers are much more digital. They're now accepting of it. Your employees are. So there's a huge push on digitalization. Of course, that's going to be really part of it. And the second was, what I call in the book, ditching bureaucracy. Lots of things that we were doing, meetings, rushing around the world. We said, why are we having all these meetings? So there's a lot of positive things, but as came out in the chat earlier, Jolene, and I'm sure that you were as interested as I was, just looking at what people were saying about how does it feel now. The words that, if we go through that list, the words of fatigue, fear, fear of the unknown, trust, leaderships being very apprehensive. And I think pretty early on, Jolene, you made the decision to have culture as one of one of the change processes that you would look at. You wanted to look really carefully at culture. And actually that focus on culture has been really important to the work, the transformational work that you've been engaged in the last couple of years since the pandemic. Actually, you and I met in London to talk about this work. before the pandemic. So when we began to talk about how we would work together, we didn't at that stage realize that actually the pandemic was going to happen. But you carried on really focusing on culture. And I wondered, I know it's played a big role. Can you just tell us more about why you focused on culture?
If I look at this, right, first of all, we talk about improve, right? I'm so glad we started this journey way before anything else, and the renewed sense of purpose itself. We have taken it further, actually. We talk about customers, we talk about conduct. It's important that we put the emphasis on the human side of culture.
Yeah.
And this is about positioning our new values. And maybe if I can, right, is to describe that to you and bring back the point. I think you say at the back of me, right? We use this in the organization and look at fundamentally about the human characteristic of how people show up for work. So we work it through like the body, right? So ambitious is all about the headspace. And this is how do we want you to think bigger and dream bigger itself. And then we talk about curiosity, it's about the eyes. How do we see the changing world around us? That's quite important for us. And then the third area is about empathy, is about the heart. Do we care for customers and our employees and colleagues itself? Then we look at courage, which is the gut. It's making bold moves and using our voice, having that voice on the table. And nimble, the feet. Do we move with speed and agility? So this is where we position culture so that it's easy to understand, that people get it as well. So what we have done is that the work we have done is we have defined this, and we have actually to date we have done 2 jams, right? 2 collaboration jams and 1 engagement survey. And what we did was that we did this exactly what Sally said earlier on about co-creation. That's really important for us in today's age itself. So what we have done, we used last year's jam to have a conversation with our people to co-create the mindset and behaviors. As a lot of you said, it's all about the mindset. So we look at the mindset and behaviors and then bring them to life itself. And not only that, we now have behaviors, we also have unaccepted behaviors. So that it's clear and simple for the organization at the workplace, and it's very practical. So I just, I could actually go to that as well. We also have peer-to-peer feedback, peer-to-peer support in that sense, in terms of what the values means. And that actually today does form part of the feedback loop for employees in their appraisal as well. And if I can, so these are some of the things that we are working through. It took some time for people to get it, to get to the new values, but now I think we have managed to work through that and people get it. And we also have put through 200 of our leaders into this program, which we call the Leadership Culture Journey, and to enable them to experience it across the organization and also to cascade that in the organization. So some things that we have been doing, I think it works for us that way.
Well, thank you so much, Jolene, for that sort of overview. And I want to unpack it a little bit more because I know that our audience will be fascinated to hear more about it. I mean, just starting with culture, I don't know if you remember years back, the books that really looked at why do organizations succeed, they all said it's to do with their culture. And I don't know if you recall that years back, people said, well, if we write them down and if we put them on a piece of paper and if we laminate that paper and give everybody then that means that's culture. But actually, what people realized is that culture was really embedded deeply in the organization. And one of the decisions that you made, Jolene, as you thought, and you and I talked about this before the pandemic, was would there be a way of engaging people in a conversation about the culture, which wasn't just asking them in an engagement survey, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? But actually asking them to talk to each other. And this is what this Jam platform is. And that's what you and I and our teams were doing together, was to form a place where people over a 3-day period could talk to each other. All the tens of thousands of people that you have in the organization could talk to each other about the values. And I think that really helped people. That helped in the process of co-creation, didn't it? I mean, I know when you and I started talking about using that JAM methodology, which is something HSM, and we're very keen on doing. When you and I started talking about that pre-pandemic, that was, I thought, from your perspective, quite a courageous move, because it's difficult to open up to a conversation where tens of thousands of people are talking to each other and could potentially say really negative things about the organization or really negative things about the senior team. But actually, that wasn't really the case, was it? What was really interesting is that you got a chance to hear about what people thought when they were thinking about those cultural aspects that are so important to you, the ones you've got written behind you. They began to say, well, this is what it means in terms of behaviors. Do you want to say a little bit more about just how you analyze that data and what that helped you to understand for the first jam that we did?
Yeah. Actually, I think I still remember the first jam, Lynda. I think we were in London. We had Harriet with us as well. Yeah. We said, should we do this jam? Should we do it differently? And they had a lot of concerns, right?
Yeah.
Because I think the organization was going through so much change. The organization was also, we were also going through some real business structural issues. And we said, is it a good time? And I just thought that it took, I just felt that we should move forward. It took a while. I think the organization was with us in this journey. And I think that the organization was courageous and said, let's give it a try. Mm-hmm. And so we did that for 14,000 our employees throughout the world itself. Mm-hmm. And I think we stuck to our overall frame. Our overall frame is top down, middle out, bottom up. Mm-hmm. And top down setting the frame, middle out really about engaging them, looking at the various issues and the various practices, norms that we have across the organization. Mm-hmm. And very importantly is the bottoms up, where we really ask them to validate some of the hypotheses that we had, to co-create the future. So what you see today, actually, which we're very proud of, is not us alone, whether it's from the HR department or the senior management. It's really what resonated with the employees. And therefore, it makes us very easy to implement the change or the ideas or the values that we have. So I just think that and that's why it took us to our second jam as well. Yeah. So we're pleased to have gone through that. Yes.
Just recently. We can come back to that in a moment, but there's a couple of interesting comments that are coming up, and I just wanted for us to have a look at those. One was about survey fatigue, and I just wanted to say how I felt about that, and then Jolene, I was going to hand over to you and see what you thought. I think surveys have got a really important role to play because it gives you a data that you can analyze, from one point to another, and you can see if things have gone up or down. So that's really important. But remember, with a survey, people only respond to the question that you've asked them. And I learned really very early on when we started doing jams, is that very often when you ask people in a crowd, as Jolene and her team did, 14,000 people, to talk about the culture, they talk about things that you didn't anticipate. And so for me, when we're HSM are doing work now on co-creating work, which is what most of our work is at the moment, answering some of the questions that you've asked in the chat, which is, how do we make this work? How do we make hybrid work? We often start with a conversation across the organization where people have a chance to talk to each other about what they believe to be important, and also to get a sense of who the champions are. Who is it? What's the big topics? I mean, Jolene, when you took a look at and you were very much actively participating in that conversation as it was playing out. How did you feel, as you saw the thousands and thousands, I don't remember, it was 100,000 comments that people made and were talking to each other. What did you see? What was surprising to you, or what did you find really interesting about that very first JAM conversation we had at the beginning of the pandemic, actually?
I think that also, I think there's a question in there, but let me just take that. So I think the question that you're also asking is that what did we see and what has changed as a result of the JAM that's taken place, right?
Yeah.
Remember, we talked about we had the JAM, and then we had the engagement survey itself.
Yeah.
I think that we can measure the change through the engagement survey, because there were a few things that that stood out, and I think is attributed to the JAM, and things that really stood out. One is around the communication, right? It's so important. And what we wanted to see is the two-way, honest communication.
Yeah.
Right. That's key for our success. And when we look at the survey, of course, there's a lot of thinking whether we should use a point system, but we did see an uptake and an improvement in that. So I think that that communication was a result of the JAM, which is important during this pandemic itself. It's just not a one-way communication. How did we actually engage the whole workforce? The second thing that might not be something that's in Europe, but in some of the cultures that we have in Asia, there is a innate fear of speaking up, being heard. Remember, one of our values was around having that voice, right? That's one thing that we take comfort when we look at the engagement survey, and it was a key issue for us in the JAM, and we saw an improvement uptake. Of course, we work on that, but that was important to us, because from these two things, you can tell that we had that we managed to actually address the innate fear of speaking out, and that meant a lot for us as an organization going through transformation and change. Right?
That's such an important point, Jolene. Thank you so much
for
making it. One of the webinars that we've done, and in fact, it's an important part of my book, is to talk about feelings of fairness and justice. And I know in the chat, a number of people have said, we're worried about that. And actually, the capacity to enable people to speak up and to have their voice heard is incredibly important in building a culture where people trust each other and where they trust you. So that's just Leon is saying to you, Jolene, wow, I love the body analogy. And I must say, it's really clever, isn't it? The way that we've related each one of your values to a part of the body, because it sticks, doesn't it? So often you say to an organization, say to an employee, what are your values? And people just say, I can't really remember. So
I was going to say it here, right? I mean, I think I said it, but I don't think I said it as well enough as one of my colleagues who actually, who's the brain behind it, Matt Collier, he's on the line as well. But I thought that was brilliant.
Yes, it really is. And it helps people. Again, one of the things that we've said during the pandemic is leaders need a narrative. They need to be able to say what's happening. And the more simple that is, and the more that people can imagine it, and everybody has a body, so we know what we mean. When you say eyes and ears and brain, we know what you mean by that. One of the things, Jolene, that's come out in the chat, and I know that you and I find this really interesting as well, is that within the JAM, when you started talking about the sort of behaviors that were acceptable, at the same time, in terms of those micro behaviors, you also looked at what was unacceptable. And a few people in the chat have said, that's really interesting. Do you want to just say a little bit more about that? Because I like that a lot, by the way. And certainly in my, I would always advise that you show all the boundaries, not just the positive boundaries, but actually the unacceptable boundaries. How did that play out for you, being really, really honest and open about unacceptable behaviors?
Yeah, I think that I think if I can use an example, we use the empathy that we talk about, the heart. Yeah.
Yes.
Things that we looked at is that we have like 3 simple questions for people to look at in terms of empathy. This is meant to get people to stop and think and to reflect on how to be to be more empathetic, right? So 3 mindsets, if I may share with you, right? One would be, how can I truly listen to a person?
Yeah.
Okay, how does bias cloud my thinking? What does this decision affect the customer? So it's at that level, at that question level. And now, so this is the main thing is about behaviors. Is how do you feel? What do you want you to behave in that sense, right? Bring it to life would mean to say, listen to others without judgment and see things from their perspective, as we said, right? Assuming that people have good intentions and doing the best that they can. If not, it will cloud your thinking itself. Yeah. Looking for what you have in common with others rather than what divides you. So I'm really also acknowledging that emotion is a part of the change, and we all have our fears and hopes. I think this is very important.
Yeah.
About fears and hope is about the emotion part of it. So this is what we have. Now we talk about not acceptable behaviors, right? Things, very simple things like interrupting others and making it difficult for them to finish their thoughts and their thinking, right? And not really listening, not really hearing what others are saying, just to get your thoughts through. So, and sometimes adding confusion to conversation, but not building on what has been said. So these are some of the things that we kind of said, this is to help you in terms of our mindset, our behaviors, as well as what is not acceptable, so that you can operate in that frame. And more importantly, because we have peer-to-peer feedback, it allows us to remind one another of what does good look like. I think that's what I like to say. Yeah.
That's such an important point. And part of what you and Matt also have been thinking about is these micro behaviors. And what we know in terms of human behavior is that the more leaders describe the micro behaviors, what exactly is it we want you to do and what exactly is it we don't want you to do, that's really helpful. I remember Christine Lagarde, she was at the IMF. I think she's now at the European Bank. She was talking to a bunch of women actually at the World Economic Forum. I don't know if you were there, Jolene, but anyway, what she was giving this astounding talk about how she ran the IMF as a woman. And one of the things she noticed is that women get interrupted in meetings. This, by the way, is a well-established research. And so she called it out. She actually said at the very beginning, this is our new culture. Part of it is that we show empathy, we listen to others, and we don't interrupt. And so every time in the meeting, somebody was interrupted, she would stop and say, please do not interrupt. And I think that it gives permission, doesn't it? As you say, with peer feedback, if you don't have an understanding of what the negatives are as well as the positives, then that's going to be, we've only got a few more minutes left, Jolene, before we open up to questions. And there was one other question that I wanted to ask you. I know that you focused a great deal on upskilling and reskilling. And as Sally said in the intro, that's been an enormously important part of my work over the last couple of years, because I think it's a huge issue. But I'm particularly interested in what you've been doing really to help people prepare for the future of work, and how you've been using some of your design thinking and training people in design thinking. I just have to say, Jolene, and maybe you don't know this, but the new book that I've written, Redesigning Work, uses as the basis of it design thinking, the idea that we need to go through those design thinking processes as we redesign work. I mean, how did you decide to do that? I know the Singapore government is very keen on supporting its industry in design thinking. Perhaps you could say something about that.
Yeah. So I think that if the pandemic has taught us anything, it's about us being much more nimble than we are. And I think whether we are as an individual, as an organization, or as a team leader itself. So this is really important for us. So what do we do then? We are really serious about this, and the major focus we're going to do as an organization is to focus on our capabilities. As we said, we have gone through a demerger, we're going through change right now. We will target our investment actually in the capabilities as a company around the area of wealth and health solutions itself, data-driven insights, and customer success and fulfillment. So these are the few things that we want to do. We have to build this for the future. Those are the key areas. Second is that I think very important, we talk about new ways of working, and so how we organize ourselves, and we've started to do that. In this industry, it's not just about the business, it's about digital as well. How do we bring both teams together to actually talk about the new ways of working? And so this is something that I think that we will do more of. In this, it's going to be require a few things. Shared understanding, a shared purpose, which we have, a shared language around norms, habits, and rhythm and habits, and routine of how we work together. So we have done that. We're starting to look at that. A lot more work. But at the high level, it's a series of design thinking programs with Luma Institute, as you have said as well. So this, with the methodology and the philosophy, this will bring it to life. So we have partner actually in Singapore, and we are very fortunate that they have invested in this, and therefore we have sent a number of our employees to this. But this will be extended throughout the organization as we speak.
Well, I'm just going to close now because I know we've got questions, but just to finish on that, I wrote, as some of you know, an article for Harvard Business Review on hybrid working. If you come to our website, you'll see lots of stuff about that. I talked about it in the webinars. The next piece I've written, which you'll see in the March edition of Harvard Business Review, is about the role of managers. Because I think, you know, as Jolene is saying, we've now, in terms of the redesign of work, we're now at a stage where we're actually beginning to implement it. And as you're finding, and I can see it from lots of your comments, this is not easy. This is not straightforward. And so certainly much of the work that HSM is doing at the moment is supporting managers in how to redesign work on a day-to-day basis. So thank you so much. We're going to open up for questions. I can see there's lots of questions that we've got here. Some we've been able to talk about as we've gone through, but there's others that haven't quite fitted into our narrative. So we may want to go back to those. But Sally, over to you, because I know you're keen that everybody, we get a chance to look at people on the Zoom. Say hi to everyone.
Yes, exactly. Thank you so much, Lynda and Jolene. I can see in the chat people have really enjoyed hearing about those specific mindsets and behaviors. I can see a request. I don't know if you can share them publicly, but I can see a couple of requests. People would love to see the full set. So some really interesting questions coming through. And actually, if everyone would like to turn on your video, if you're able to or willing to, if you haven't had enough Zoom fatigue for today, it'd be great to see everyone. And a couple of questions I'll call out. So one from Emma Francis. I don't know, Emma, if you'd like to turn the camera on and ask your question for Jolene. It's a really interesting.
I think it's on the, hi.
Hi, so sorry.
Hi, Emma.
Hello, I wasn't planning to be on camera, so excuse the state.
At least you haven't got your pajamas on, or perhaps you...
Yes, that is a win for today. Yeah, no, I was really interested in so I work as an organizational development and change practitioner, so culture is the heart of what I do, and I work in a public sector organization. And I suppose with this great work that you were talking about, I was really interested in thinking about how did that work with any competing business delivery priorities that you had, and how did that work with that executive leadership in terms of the decision making on how to promote it, and how were you able to keep that as a priority in amongst then the pandemic that came along, and then again operational requirements that would have come out of that?
Oh, that's such a good question, isn't it? Isn't it,
Yes,
Jolene?
yes.
Prioritization. That's your job as a CHRO, isn't it, Jolene? You, in the end, the buck stops with you in terms of how you prioritize. How did you go about that? It's a great question.
I think that first of all, I think with our purpose and our values, right, it resonates with people. As I said, because we co-created that, helping people get the most of life, and we define what that means for the business about healthcare accessible and protecting the assets and all that. So I think that itself, because it resonates with people, right, it's not even a priority. It's the way that we speak, the way that we behave, the way that we expect of people. So it took us a while, but I think right now we're on that journey and I'm very happy. And so one of the things that we had recently on the Digital Council, they said, Andy put up and said, oh, these are the values we abide by, and these are the things that are important. So I think it's a journey, and it takes a bit of time, but if it is meaningful, if it resonates with the business and the priorities that you have, it will become it's something that you do on a daily basis. It's no longer, this is strategy, this is culture, and this is value. It all comes together very nicely. So this is what I've experienced. So I'm very fortunate to be in that space, a purpose-led organization.
Yeah, and I think, one of the things that I love, I'm a great fan of jams, actually, not just because it's one of HSM products, but we sort of invented them within HSM as a way of building co-creation, which I believe is sort of fundamental to organizational design. But with regard to prioritization, one of the really interesting things that happens is that senior executives are listening and talking to people all around the company. And I don't know about you, Jolene, but one thing I notice when I'm in a jam and watching those conversations evolve is that senior executives are listening and hearing what people are saying that's really important to them, and they can then respond. Now, that doesn't mean to say that every senior executive has to take every employee's prioritization, but they're much more aware of what's really important to people. Jolene, I don't know if you felt that as well, that these conversations just give executives a real sense of what's going on and what's important.
So I think I was going to say that definitely, and that's where we have bottoms-up approach, and it talks about that matters to them. Yeah, on the personal life as well. And I think, Sally, we also had this your favorite songs, right? What was the song that was was your favorite song during the pandemic? And so something is interesting, right? You can share through music in a very different way, and that kind of pull the organization together in a very fun way as well. So that brings about fun. It brings about a little bit of a relaxed kind of a workplace as well for them, and a little bit of balance. So I think it is those are the things that we are seeing in a very different light. And the second jam, I think people were even more open, much more transparent about how they feel, what they like, what they don't, and it's just a really good experience that we had in the organization. So the organization is actually looking forward to. We have not shared the results with them. I'm sure they'll be delighted to see some of the results that we have.
Oh yes, because we've just run another jam, haven't we, which we're analysing at the moment, just to give a sense of what's changed and the languages of people using the narratives and so on, and getting those micro behaviours, which Matt is referring to as well, just to say how interesting it was that they weren't just things like don't bully, so that doesn't help. What does don't bully? But actually to say don't interrupt somebody, that's a very specific piece. Sorry, Sarah, back to you.
Great. So we've probably got time for one more. I don't know if we've still got Liza with us. Liza Shubaka was asking a really interesting question around how we keep people connected during this, remote working period, and then I guess into the hybrid period. Are you with us, Liza?
Yes, I am.
Hi, Liza.
Hi, how are you?
Good to see you.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. So interested to learn more about how do we keep the teams connected
Yeah.
so that we don't get a new crop of individual players within our teams, and then the team synergies get to die.
Such a good question, Lisa. Jolene,
I was going to ask Lynda, give us some advice and tips first.
Well, actually, do you know, interesting, Lisa, I think the real problem at the moment is over-connection, not under-connection. I think that one of the reasons we're all fatigued is we're just going from one Zoom to another. I know I feel bad because I know this is a Zoom that we're doing with you now. But actually, part of what I've been writing about is the importance of giving people time, giving ourselves time when we're asynchronous, when we're not connected. So I think that, you know, this balance between being connected, but also realizing that quite a lot of work that's done in your organization requires you to disconnect, not to be connected. So getting that back, you know, that's asynchronous, synchronous work. So synchronous work is what we're doing now. This is virtual synchronous work. We're all together, although they're virtual. Asynchronous work is what I'm about to do in a moment, where I just work on my own, you know, preparing something or other. So I think that's that connectivity that's really important. But Jolene, you know, I know that connectivity is really important to the Prudential, because you've got people scattered all over Africa, all over Asia Pacific. I mean, Asia, how do you, what are some of the things that you feel are really important for connectivity?
Yeah, I think a few things. I think first of all, right, we encourage everyone when you come onto the call, actually, is to check in first before you dive into your business. Yeah. I think that's the first. Yeah. Second is to make sure that for me, I think for a lot of leaders is also have your video on. Yeah. Because then you can connect, you can have eye contact, you can know what's going on as well. I think that's the second thing. The third thing is I think that operating in communities, right, create like-minded groups itself that enable people to connect in a very different way, in an environment that feels safe, in topics that they want to share. So we have some of that going on, but we are about to start with more. I think that's important.
I think that's fantastic advice, Jolene. I think the checking in is really important. Just so everyone knows, the research on that is crystal clear, that leaders who check in rather than check up, that's it. That's the difference. It's checking in, not checking up. That makes a real difference. So that's a fantastically interesting point. And then the third point that Jolene made, which is about communities of practice. You know, one of the things, Lisa, that we've learned in virtual work is that we can build communities of practice. And for those of you who are building companies where you're going across national borders, the capacity to bring people together because of that, there's a topic of interest to them, like we're doing today, is really, really important. Checking in rather than checking up, Jan. So checking in would be to say, how are you, you know, tell me more about how you are. Checking up would be to say, let's look at the figures right now. So, but back to communities of practice. So I think, you know, there's a real opportunity here. And one of the things that we do in the Jam is we look at the networks of who is talking to each other. What are they talking about, so that we can start to build those communities ourselves and say, look, do you realize there's a whole bunch of people out there who are very excited to talk about X? Why don't we keep them, you know, together and actually build a community of practice? So I so agree with Jolene that these communities of practice are, because you don't want everyone connected to everybody else. It's exhausting. We're realizing that. But actually being connected to somebody who's really important to you, that's a real winner. I can see that time is running out, Sally, so I'm going to hand back to you. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jolene and Lynda. What a fantastic conversation. To everyone who's asked questions. For those of you who are interested in the specific mindsets and behaviors, I can see Matt has said the Prudential website careers page is going to be updated in the next few weeks. So you can stay tuned for that. We will send out a recording of today's webinar, so do feel free to share it and the key insights. And our next webinar is going to be on November 2. It's about the redesign of work, and It's very excitingly based on Lynda's new model for how to redesign work in the hybrid age. So that's exciting. We'll also have a spotlight webinar coming up specifically on hybrid in the legal sector, where we'll be joined by one of the big UK law firms. So that's what's coming up. We hope you can join us and register for those. But thank you so much again to Jolene Chen for joining us from Prudential, to the whole Prudential team. We love working with you all, and to Lynda. And have a lovely rest of the day, whatever time of day it might be.
Thank you. Thanks, Sally. And thank you so much, Jolene. What a pleasure to reconnect with you this morning. And thanks to everybody on the call. What a super conversation. Thank you so much. Bye for now.
Thank you so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.